I'm literally so sunburned right now. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today I'm going to be talking about my AP drawing portfolio. I just got my score back today, and I was a little shocked by the score, which is why I decided to probably preface this. I was told by so many people, and I was super confident that I would end up getting a 5 on this, and I actually got a 4. So before you click out of this video and you're like, oh, I only want to see people who got 5s, like perfect scores, I think you should probably see what I submitted. And I'll leave timestamps in the description if you don't want to hear me talk about everything. But I was like so confident that I would get a 5 on this, and the only thing that I think could have been better was my writing, which the writing for this was really difficult for me because of the subjects that I had and the topic that I chose. So if you kind of want to see like what a 4 looks like, or just if you're feeling really confident and you feel like you know that you're going to do really well, maybe just see, because I think it's worth noting that you might turn into me that looks really good, you have like good reasoning behind it, and they still might not think that it's worth a 5. Okay, so the AP exam includes a concentration part, and then there's also a technically excellent. They're just like pieces that you think look really good and that you want to show them. So I'm only going to show my concentration pieces in this video because the 3 pieces that I submitted for my technically excellent are in my other video I just posted about my college portfolio. So I'll leave the names of those and the link to that video in the description if you want to see what those were. But I figured I'd focus on the concentration in this one because I feel like that's obviously the more challenging part of this exam. So for my concentration, I actually focused on the 7 vices and the 7 virtues of the Bible. I was raised Catholic, and in my time during high school, I learned a lot more about science and history and all of these different religions. I sort of started to drift away from the traditional Christian Catholic religious outlook. So this was sort of me doing my own research on elements of the religion to understand my own theological beliefs. I'm not going to specifically say where I stand at this point, but I will say that doing this project did sort of push me away from that, because the 7 vices and the 7 virtues of the Bible, they're all natural human emotions. So a lot of my pieces are trying to convey that vices are normal human reactions to things that happen in life. You shouldn't be shamed for feeling those things. And then my virtue pieces are a lot more focused on how maybe being that way isn't always so good. Maybe it's performative, maybe it's not genuine. So this concentration is really important to me, so regardless of my score, I'm still really proud of the body of work I did because it was really important to me. So obviously, if you took an AP exam this year, you know that all of the rules changed because of coronavirus. So the amount of pieces we had to submit did shorten. My original intent was to do the 7 vices, the 7 virtues, and then my final piece was going to be 2 panels that opened up, and on one side is going to be Lilith, and on the other was Eve, because I identified with Lilith more, because she refused to be submissive to Adam in the garden, and she was cast out by God for wanting to be equal. So I really identified with her versus Eve, who chose to be submissive. That's just my take on it. I don't want to offend anybody with what I'm saying at all. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about my focuses when I was working on this. Mainly exploring color theory, and color psychology, working on dynamic compositions, and then all of my pieces include allegorical symbolism, which just means I had this book that talked about symbolism in Christian art and Christian literature, which I used to help me communicate my messages. I also really wanted to focus on what I believe to be negative impacts that religious structures have on modern society in terms of lawmaking, moral compass, all of those things, which is just my personal opinion. Again, I'm really not trying to offend anybody by my work, but this is mainly a personal exploration for me. I also then focused on art history and historical art concepts because I took AP Art History during my junior year, and that greatly influenced the pieces that I made later on in my concentration. Just as I discussed in my college portfolio video, you always want to start with the worst piece and end with the best, so they're left with the impression that you know what you're doing, that you grew over time while you worked on your concentration. So the first piece I included was called Gluttony. This one was really simple. It was a piece I did a little bit later in terms of the timeline, but I felt that stylistically it wasn't as strong, so I started with this one. I really wanted to focus on my ability to work with more dynamic and varied brush marks, and I focused on using sickly skin tones like the lavenders and the muted pinks and things like that. I also included multiple mouths because the only allegorical symbolism for gluttony was someone physically drinking liquor or things like that, and I didn't really want to do something that literal, so I just decided to do several mouths to show that overconsumption. Again, very simple. If you're gonna do a portfolio like I did, I would probably suggest doing things that are more similar to the pieces that I'm going to show later, because this was just frankly too simple, which might have contributed to why I got a 4. So the second piece in my portfolio is called Envy, and this one was actually the second piece I did in terms of the timeline. This one had a huge focus on color psychology with the green tones, which are typically symbols of greed, envy, jealousy associated with money, and it also goes with the colloquial phrase green with envy, which is why I included that. And then the snake that's portrayed in the painting is the main symbolism used, and it is symbolic of the snake in the garden, greed, trickery, envy, and all of those things. And I also was kind of playing off the modern term of like snake in culture, like when someone's being deceptive, you call them a snake. So yeah. Okay, so the next piece I submitted was called Diligence, which mainly focuses on gold tones and yellows because they're a symbol of strength, but also a symbol of wealth. I was trying to show conflict in the work because people who work really hard, and this was mentioned in my book about Christian symbolism, that people who are persistent with their work can often gain wealth, which then leads to greed. So it's like you can't win. It's a double-edged sword. Oak leaves and bees are symbols of working towards a common goal of a group, betterment, strength, persistence, which is why I included all of these things in this piece. In addition, the subject is a really good friend of mine, and she's really hardworking, which is why I included her in this. The next piece I submitted is called Humility. I included violets and strawberry blossoms as my main symbolic focus because they symbol true humility in the Bible. But then I also, again to create conflict in the work, showed the subject sort of fading into the background to show that she's kind of diminished, because I was trying to show that too much humility can sometimes lead to a diminished sense of self and devalue somebody to think that they're not worth as much. Again, just trying to show conflict in the work between the literal definition in the Bible and how I perceive all of these things to be normal human reactions and emotions. Then I submitted the piece Wrath, which had a main symbolic focus of spiders, which are often compared to the devil in the Bible, but at the same time, they're also symbols of immense ability and strength. I used the color psychology of warm reds to symbolize anger, which is very common. Anger is normally associated with red. I really like how this one turned out. I think it's one of the best ones out of all of them. And then I actually sewed string into the canvas to mimic the motions of a web being created, because that's usually what's thought about when you think about spiders and like their ability and their talent to again emphasize the conflict in the work. The next piece I submitted is called Temperance. This piece was loosely based off some tarot cards that I had looked at, because religions associated with tarot card reading is usually shamed upon by the Catholic and Christian faiths. It's sort of ironic that I chose that as the inspiration for this. I thought this one didn't really turn out as good as I had initially thought it would, but I thought the concept was strong enough to include it later on. And Temperance is usually somebody who has a lot of self-control, so there's a lot of golds and copper leaves on here because it's really conflicting with the idea of self-control and holding back. I also included keys as the biblical symbolism for this piece because that was basically the only thing I could find. I was gonna do keys and a chalice, but I just kind of gave up. It was like to the grindstone. I was doing this, there was only like a week left. So I was like, okay, we just need to like finish. So the next piece I submitted is called Charity. This is probably one of my favorite pieces that I did during this entire concentration, and I probably should have put it a little bit later in the timeline that I did, but my teacher and I decided to put it a little further back. But this piece is a common social commentary on Donald Trump and the economic impacts he's had over the past 4 years, which I feel very strongly about. I don't want to get super political on this channel, even though that's honestly who I am as a person. I am pretty active in politics, but there's some mixed media. There's newspaper clippings in the background of some news stories about stuff he's done. And then I did use color psychology in this as well because peach is typically symbolic of charity. Charitable tongue is what's used in the Bible when talking about charity. And then I used a black portrait subject because Black Lives Matter. This also had a lot of Basquiat references in it because I really appreciate his style and his approach to working on art, and I kind of wanted to incorporate that, again referring back to the art history element of my concentration. And then I also did a spray paint crown and cross on it, which not only reflects Basquiat style, but I was also trying to show that a lot of people that donate to charity, it's like they want to be rewarded for their good work. It's like they think that they should be rewarded for that, and they are put on a false pedestal like a false god. So again, there's bringing in that conflict. Okay, so the final 3 pieces were stylistically different from literally everything else that I submitted in the entire portfolio, which I don't know if that contributed to my score, but it might have. But to me, that's growth. I don't really think that that's something I should be penalized for, but maybe they thought differently. This piece is called Greed. I mainly modeled this off of a stained glass window in terms of the shape, which I custom cut myself. I decided you guys should probably see what it looks like. Because I haven't showed this one on camera before. But it's oil painting on wood board. I focused on using primary colors for the most part to keep the color scheme relatively simple. But this is when I got really drawn into the art history subjects that I previously discussed. So it's very much so inspired by Renaissance work, especially with like this top eye, if you guys can see. In addition to the type of fabric I used. For Greed, I actually focused on a historical viewpoint of French monarchy, which is why we have the fleur-de-lis here. I was thinking a lot about Versailles and Paris because we discussed that a lot in my art history class. So I kind of wanted to address that aspect of things, and this is when I really got into oil painting. This definitely isn't my best oil painting, but yes. And again, the type of flower used is called a Greek orchid, which is typical symbolism of greed in the Bible. In addition, the eye symbolizes that watchful eye of God, sort of watching over this greedy person. And I kind of wanted her to look very wealthy and elegant with like the type of jewelry she's wearing, and she's obviously a very beautiful person. And obviously the inclusion of gold ink on the outside sort of emphasizes that viewpoint of wealth. The next piece that I submitted is called Patience, and I'm actually the subject of this piece. It doesn't look as good as it could have because the pencil I used to draft this on this gesso board leaked through every single layer of paint that I did, so I had to keep going over the face, and even now I haven't varnished it yet because it keeps on leaking through. But yeah, so I made myself the subject of this because I'm like the most impatient person to ever live, so I thought it was kind of funny that I was the subject of patience. And then these flowers are included in a painting of a saint. I actually had a friend in class help me figure that one out, and I will include the name of that painting because I can't remember it off the top of my head. So again, these are really focused on art history, especially with this gold leaf framing on the outside is really typical of medieval art and Gothic art. Also, the type of plants that I included is a symbolism of impatience, which is why they're there. Actually, I think the flower is called impatience. I think that's why I did that actually. If I got that wrong, I'll correct myself when I edit it. But yeah, here's this one. And then the very last piece I submitted is called Sloth. To me, there's no question that this one is definitely the best, especially if you look at the texture of the skin that I managed to achieve with this piece. I'm really, really proud of this even now. My style has again changed since doing this. This is about 4 months old, 3 months old now. But for this piece, I was again really focused on mimicking classical art with my history, with my knowledge of art history, in addition to using symbolism again, with the poppy flowers are symbolic of sleep, which sloth is like laziness, sleeping a lot, all of that stuff. Behind her actually is a abandoned church. So another Christian definition of sloth is to be away from church for a long period of time, to like be so lazy that you don't go tend mass. So I was trying to show, like, again, this subject is me, just like the other one, because I ran out of people to take pictures of because I was stuck at home during quarantine. But the subject is like laying in a field outside this abandoned church, and she's just like sleeping. And I thought it was kind of funny that I gave her like a saint crown, because she's basically doing the opposite of what she's supposed to be doing. So I was again trying to approach this with like an ironic standpoint. But yeah, I'm gonna do another close-up of the face on this one. Okay, so that was my concentration. It's kind of crazy. It's like a year's worth of work, and I just got my score back. And again, I am a little shocked by the score. Going through things now and having more experience now as an artist, I can see where things could have been improved, but I mean, that's life, that's just how it goes. The writing was really challenging for me, so I encourage you, if you're an incoming student to an AP art course, really read about what you need to write. I found the writing to be extremely difficult because you had to write about what you're physically doing with your hand and the motion, but not the subject. So I think I may have lost points because most of my work is centered around symbolism, things that need explaining, whereas someone that's focusing on simply line or color or form, for them it might be easier to do the writing because they're not so much focused on the meaning behind it, whereas I am strictly focused on finding the meaning of what I'm doing first and then carrying out the movement. I did actually do some of the other vices and virtues, but I'm not gonna really show them. I left them out for a reason when filling out my concentration, and it was kind of nice that they shortened it because of coronavirus, because it actually let me leave out pieces that I think were really, really not good. They just weren't good. They were not good, and it was for the best that they got left out. I recommend to anyone that you read the actual guidelines for the AP exam, like what they want to see, what they want to know that you're capable of. And I think another part that made this difficult is because the old AP model had you submit a breath portfolio, which is like a set of strictly what they want to know that you're capable of drawing, whereas with this concentration I was basically allowed to do anything I want, which means I basically just did portraits, so they kind of only got to see that part, other than the technically excellent pieces that I submitted, which again I'll have in the description the name of those and the link to the video if you want to see them. And then if you have any questions about the AP portfolio process, I'd be happy to answer them. I know a lot of people in my class focused on different things than I did, and everybody's looked completely different. This is just how I decided to go about this, as like a form of personal exploration. And even though I didn't get a 5, I think that the experience overall was really helpful for me as an artist, and I've been able to grow and learn from it. So if you like the video, you can leave a like, you can subscribe if you like my work. I'm gonna try to upload like once a week, but I don't really know because I am a student and I am gonna be going to college in like a month, which is crazy. And I'd love to know what you guys think, or if you have any questions. Bye.